ASMR, Jody, and true crime lovers. This evening I'm going to be reading some scary stories. So a little bit of mic brushing and tapping and maybe some other triggers. So this story is called Help Me. I grip the mug tightly with two hands to keep it from shaking. I take a deep breath and try to steady my mind. Coffee-scented steam curls into the air, catching the morning light that shines cheerily through the huge bay window. Mere weeks ago, I walked into this house for the very first time and knew immediately I had to have it. I imagine moments like this sitting in front of the beautiful east-facing windows while enjoying the serenity of my morning cup of coffee. To the realtors, surprise, I didn't hesitate to take it. If I had only known then what I know now, if I had been able to sense that some kind of evil lived here, I would have left this place as fast as I could and never ever looked back. I sighed and wiped my tired, bloodshot eyes. This was supposed to be my fresh start. I signed the divorce papers and the lease on the same day. Kenneth cried, but I didn't. After 8 years, I couldn't even muster a single tear. Instead, all I felt was an immense wave of relief. "I'm gonna miss you, Anna," he said, his eyes sparkling. I guess he should have thought about that before he slept with some woman named Cindy. I moved all the boxes from the motel room I called home for far too long, leaving the wedding album on the curb where it belonged. The first night, sleeping on nothing but a bare mattress on the floor. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted off of my shoulders. I felt free, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. That would be the only night I'd sleep peacefully in this house. It started with the whispers. As I unpacked boxes on my bedroom floor the next night, I had heard it. At first, I thought it may be the rustling of the wind, giving it no thought. However, as night fell and the orange sunset melted into the inky blackness of night, the noise grew louder. It became unmistakable. I sat on the floor, back rigid, and listened as it grew in volume. A high-pitched child's voice, soft and unintelligible. "Hello," I said, my voice crackling. "Is someone there?" The noise stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the thunder of my racing pulse. Then it began again, louder this time, more panicked. It was coming from the closet. I stood and slowly approached the door, the closed door of the nearly empty closet. Could there really be somebody in there? As I drew closer, my arm outstretched towards the handle, I was shaking. I could feel the adrenaline running through my veins, my heart pounding. I took a deep breath and I opened up the door, but as I did, I could make out two chilling words repeated over and over again. "Help me, help me." I swung the door open, terrified of what I might see, but it was empty. How could this possibly be? I heard it. restless week, but a week nonetheless. The whispers hadn't come again, and I was beginning to think I may have imagined the whole thing. Stress, I told myself, from the divorce. I felt so uncomfortable, in fact, that when I awoke, parched in the latest hours of the night, when the suburban silence most heavily blankets the streets, I hadn't thought twice before climbing out of bed to get a glass of water. I fumbled for the hallway light switch, the place still unfamiliar to me, when I glanced down the narrow room and saw something that made my blood run cold. Illuminated by a shaft of moonlight was the form of a woman, small, ephemeral. The shadowy silhouette reached out towards me with an outstretched hand. A tiny animalistic moan escaped its lips. Whatever it was in pain. Before I could recoil, it was gone, darting through the wall and disappearing into the night as if it had never been there at all. It had been there, though. I know it. I know what I saw. Or I'm losing my mind. I'm suddenly jolted out of my thoughts by a knock at the door. The coffee in my hand has gone cold. How long had I been sitting there? I jumped to my feet and pulled my robe tightly around me as I shuffled clumsily to the door. I swing it open, and before me stands a tiny older woman with a flossy gray hair and a kind smile. "Well, good morning, dear. I hope I didn't wake you," she says, her smile faltering silently as she notices my unkempt appearance and the dark circles that ringed my eyes. I'm silent for a moment, trying to make sense of things. She shuffles and clears her throat uncomfortably. "I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Thelma. I live next door. I think your paper was delivered to us this morning. I thought I'd bring it over and some cookies. Cookies, of course." She extended a plate of cookies and the day's paper to me. "Of course," I exclaimed. "Please come in. You have to forgive my confusion. I haven't had my coffee yet." Her smile returns and she hands me the cookies. "I'm more a fan of tea," she says. Well, isn't she picky? I puzzle her inside and put the kettle on to boil, trying to shake off the fear that clings to me for hours after every night. We make pleasantries, but I'm barely listening, my eyes darting back and forth like fearful prey. But then I hear something that makes my ears perk and fear prickle my spine. I'm just surprised somebody moved in here after all. After what happened, Thelma says, lowering her voice as she speaks. "It was horrible, dear. Hot sweat floods my palms." "What do you mean?" I ask. I'm not sure I want to know, but I have to. "It's the murder, of course," Thelma replies with a raised brow. I gulp. "That sick man killed his wife while she was pregnant with their child. He buried them right over there in the backyard. It took months before anyone found out. You can imagine my surprise, but surely you know this already." My heart thumps in my throat. The woman smiles, not kindly this this time, but menacingly. She's enjoying this, I suddenly realized, being the bearer of bad news. She was relishing the moment of revelation. Suddenly I feel afraid in a way I've never felt before. The walls of the house were closing in on me. The old woman looms before me with a ghoulish smile still plastered across her face. She inhales and licks her thin, dry lips. I was right next door when he did it. I told my husband I thought I'd heard a noise, but he said it was impossible. Later, when we found out what happened, it all made sense. She was crying out, that woman, you know, while she was being stabbed over and over and over. She was saying, "Help me." Help me. Dead and breakfast. You would never know by looking at this place. It had been such a horror. When we arrived, it was crisp fall day, the kind of day where the air seems clear, the trees were a palette of autumnal warmth, and the lone bed and breakfast at the end of the long winding driveway looked both regal and comforting. It was the picture-perfect place for a romantic getaway. Of course, Joy and I weren't there to enjoy the scenery. We were there to hunt ghosts. Check-in went smoothly, and we were shown up to the first room on the right of the second floor as per our request. The woman at the desk gave us a knowing look as she noted the room number and the bulging containers of paranormal tracking technology that I breathlessly walked up the carpeted staircase. She was probably used to it. This place had a reputation after all, and we were far from the first ghost hunters to stay the night. We made ourselves comfortable. The room was quaint and antique, all lace and dark wood. It reminded me of my grandmother's house in the best of ways. We lounged on the four-poster bed until the sun began to set. "We better get ready, Karen," Joy finally said, glancing towards the window. "It's almost nightfall." I nodded and we sprang into action. Joy and I had been working together for so long that the process was seamless. When we first began our work almost 10 years ago, it had simply been the two internet friends meeting up to have a laugh over a shared passion. But as we started experiencing more and more unexplainable things, it became a full-blown obsession. We began documenting our encounters with paranormal from our own enjoyment, but after one of our videos garnered over 1 million views on YouTube, we realized we could make it a business. Now a trip to a haunted bed and breakfast is simply a typical work trip. Joy turned on the camera and checked the mic before handing it to me. Then we pulled out the EMF detector, so we would be able to detect atmospheric abnormalities. Meanwhile, I tried to decide where to set up the REM pod. Joy caught my eye and snickered when she saw me place it on the bed. "You think the spirits will be sleepy, huh?" she asked playfully. I smiled despite myself. Escape beyond. The window disappeared into the darkness. We were ready. She took her seat in front of the camera and I began Hi subscribers, welcome back to our channel. Today we're at a very special place. We're staying at the Stone Town Bed and Breakfast, or B&B, which many true fans might recognize the name of. It was once the home of a wealthy and prominent Blackwell family in the early 20th century. They were known in the era for keeping to themselves and were considered just as mysterious in life as they are in death. What we do know, however, is that one autumn night, much like tonight, the woman of the house, Agatha Blackwell, killed her entire family. She started with her two children, Eddie and John. She used their pillows to smother them. Then, in this very room that was once the master, she pulled out a pistol and shot her husband as he slept. Finally, she turned the gun on herself. The bodies weren't found for over a week because of the remote location, and private nature of the family. When they were finally identified, they had become so badly decomposed that they were hardly recognizable. No one knows why Agatha did it, but tonight we're going to find out. With that, I slipped the light switch, hurling the room into darkness. Quote, and now we wait, unquote. At first, there was little activity. We began as usual, asking for spirits to show yourself. We caught some unintelligible audio. For an amateur ghost hunter, this might have been a win, but we hardly stopped there. We asked and waited and asked again for a while. There was nothing. And it seemed that the night would be a bust. I yawned and checked my watch. Almost midnight, I thought. Then it happened all at once. The EMF reader blinked orange. We fell silent and waited. Then, clear as day, we heard, "Why, Mommy? Why?" It was a child's voice. I felt the familiar rush of fear and adrenaline. We had made contact. Joyce stopped pacing the room and sat down again in front of the camera. "We want to know why, too," she said. The EMF detector blinked orange again, and the REM pod began to beep. My spine tingled. Down. These were some serious readings. Joy doubled down. Quote, "Why did you do it, Agatha? Why did you kill those precious little angels?" Unquote. I tensed at the question. We didn't want to make her mad. Joy was too excited, though. Through the camera lens, I could see it on her face. Then we heard the same small voice again. "Terrible," it said. "Terrible. My skin prickled with goosebumps. All of our devices were now beeping wildly, the lights blinking like strobes. We heard another sound, a different voice this time, but it was just as clear. It was a woman. She was sobbing. I gulped and finally seized Joy's expression, falter. This one of our most extreme encounters to date. And the reality of the situation suddenly became heavy. "Why?" Joy cried out again. "Why did you do it?" violent scream. His hands reached out towards her neck. The long fingers wrapped around her delicate throat before I could cry out. All of the meters were going crazy. My heart stopped. My breath began to increase. The meters began to blink and they began to chime louder and brighter than I'd ever seen before. I gasped and threw on the lights. Joy sat in her chair, rigid with terror. The man was gone, but something else was there. A word sprawled across the wall in dripping blood. Revenge. Revenge. I had never packed so quickly in my life. Joy did too, scrambling around the cursed room in a flurry of silent fear. We threw our gear in the car and watched as the smirking front desk woman waved us goodbye. She had seen it all before. As we drove off into the night, I thanked both God and the devil that my friend had made it out alive. However, when I turned to offer her my sympathy, her toothy grin was plastered across her face. Confused, I asked her what in the world she was so happy about. She fixing me with her unflappable gaze. When she spoke, her voice betrayed no fear. "This is going to make a great video," she said. As they drove away, I could feel my blood run cold. Bean was my golden lab. She was nearing 10 years old, and sudden illness struck her out of nowhere and would not leave. She was constantly coughing, out of breath, walking much slower. You name it, she added. As hard as it was for me, I knew her time was nearing. Sometimes I would hear her coughing after I went to bed, and I would lay down beside her dog bed and just rub her back. She deserved so much love. She was such a good dog. She was my world. I finally relented and had to put her down. My heart was broken into 1,000 pieces, each one shattered memory of our lives together. I did have another dog, actually. Her brother, Sven. I'd watched Sven search the house for her in the few weeks after her passing, and it just broke my heart. My heart. One evening before bed, I was in the living room and started to turn off the lights and fold up blankets so I could go to sleep. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow of a dog walk into my bedroom. I called over to my shoulder while folding my favorite quilt. "Sven, not yet. You haven't gone potty yet." A few seconds later, not enough time for Sven to hustle out of my bedroom. I felt his nose against my bare leg. I looked down and he was sitting upright, his tail wagging on his bed. He'd never left his dog bed at all. A little creeped out, I went to the bedroom and investigated. I turned the light on and rummaged through around to find nothing and miss. I had to wonder, was that Bean? Was she still there? I couldn't get the thought out of my mind that night. After a few days, I'd forgotten about the ordeal. I was lying in the bed watching some television and had his face at the wall. This was creeping me out. I watched him closely, trying to decide if I needed to be freaked out or happy. He let out this low whine and started wagging his tail. For a few minutes, I just watched him, then the wall. I observed him until his tail finally stopped wagging, and he turned his face up to me as to say, "It's gone now, Mom." I picked up all of the toys and placed them back into the toy bin. I sat upright and walked around the house, checking all the doors, the windows, and the closets for some peace of mind, but nothing was there or out of the ordinary. No one was in the house. Finally, this brings me to the last unexplained event. This one had to be about a month after Bean was gone. I felt cooped up with my grief in the house, so I'd taken Sven to a lake to have some fun. I packed a lunch for myself and brought a ball and some towels. Sven loved fetching a ball in the water. He and Bean would do it for hours in the sun. I was excited to get some of the time to play with him. Sven was having a blast and jumping and retrieving. So he's having a blast jumping and retrieving. After a while, he finally got worn out and panting heavily. He'd sat to my right, refusing to budge when I'd bring my arm up to fake throw the ball. That's when I heard it, the whine. It only lasted a split second, but there was no denying it. It sounded like my Bean. Bean had a unique whine. She also loved to fetch. First, Sven's whine is deeper, and second, Sven's ears perked up at the sound, and his panting mouth slowly closed, showing his concentration on the noise. Sven and I sat there in silence after that for a moment. I wondered if he was thinking what I was thinking, and eyed him as the time passed by. That was the only whine we'd heard like that. I'm pretty sure after these experiences that my Bean stayed with us, at least for a while. And I'm glad, because I needed her to be there while I healed. One quick story I have to tell. When I lost my one Chihuahua, Mr. Mo, or Cosmo, it was kind of out of the blue, and I, for some reason, had grabbed my camera and took a picture of my daughter sitting in bed with the three other Chihuahuas, Vegas, Chance, and Karma. And in each picture, I could see Cosmos clearly, and if I can find the pictures, I will post them. But you can see him crawling up over my daughter around Karma, which he had been with for 17 years. She was his buddy. So, but the weird thing is that night, the night he passed away, or the day, actually I found him the next morning. He was having like his normal coughing fit, and I rubbed his throat and said goodnight, but I had a weird feeling that he wouldn't make it. So when I opened the door to their bedroom, I realized, and I saw him passed away, it wasn't like a shock, I was just sad. But here's the thing. So he always would bark and flap his ears when he wanted up on the bed or had to go to the bathroom, which was always his thing. Out of all the dogs I've ever had, that was his thing. He'd shake his head and flap his ears. And I heard it 3 times, clear as day. I mean, clear as day. And then I took another picture that next morning with the dogs all sitting in their beds in their room, and you can clearly see there's him sitting there in his shadow form, but the sun was coming in from behind them, so all the other dog shadows were one way, but then glass door, and then she came back in, skipping and hobbling like her normal self. It was so bizarre and interesting